Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, the running mate debate, Walz and Vance, folksy versus slick. We'll look at the highlights and the lowlights.
Meanwhile, Trump is talking tough on crime. In fact, he's kind of advocating police brutality. But first...
A funny thing happened in the vice presidential debate today between Tim Walz and JD Vance. They had a debate. Well, sort of. They argued over policies and ways to address issues, including access to healthcare and housing, what to do about gun violence and how to manage illegal immigration. Some of the sharpest differences were over access to abortion. Vance wants more women to be able to afford to have babies. Walz wants women to have a choice, no matter which state they live in.
I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family.
How can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography?
Strong point from Tim Walz, but JD Vance acknowledging the Republican Party has a problem with the abortion issue and they want to find a pro-family solution was an interesting approach.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, for a start, I agree with you. That was a very high-quality debate. One of the best debates I've seen, I'd say, actually. And it was refreshingly civil with each other. But on that point, I agree completely that JD Vance coming out and saying the Republican Party has a problem with losing people's trust on this issue, and we need to regain their trust. And acting as a sympathetic face, like he was agreeing that how much of a tragedy this situation was, and that was a unusual way to approach it. And I think it made his ticket seem more trustworthy than people might have thought going into it. I thought it was a very effective tactic.
Yeah, although there is still a little bit of a strange argument that they're making, which is we believe in the individual state's rights to choose, not the individual human's rights to choose. And that's something they really can't get over. But yes, you're right, it did remain mostly very, very civil. There were even some points of agreement. There were some awkward moments too, particularly from Tim Walz. He was sketchy at the start. He confused Iran with Israel, Israel with Iran. And then he was asked about reports that he'd falsely claimed he was in Hong Kong at the time of the Tiananmen Square massacre in June 1989, when records show, in fact, he did not arrive until August of that year.
Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said.
That's what he said. Saying he misspoke, I guess, is a very political way out of a bind. Saying that he's a knucklehead, I guess that's more in line with Tim Walz's image, although it may not be a great soundbite for somebody wanting to be a heartbeat away from the presidency to say that he's a knucklehead who has, now misremembered a number of pretty key facts. Misremembered, misspoke, exaggerated, lied. But it's possible that this could become damaging. These things are piling up a little bit now.
Well, I mean, he certainly has a track record of exaggerating things. I think that's fair to say. But I also think he's weathered that storm. I think that was about a month ago now, and I think that's kind of priced in a little bit. I'm surprised he was as unprepared for that as he was. He had one soundbite, and when they followed up and gave him more time, he just sat there silently going, oh, you want me to say more? He didn't quite know what to say. It reminded me of the CNN interview about a month ago when they asked him once again about some of those serial exaggerations, and he wasn't prepared then either. I would have, if I was him, I'd be more prepared. I mean, that story was in the news yesterday. He should have been ready for it. But having said that, generally, that was only one moment when he was really, I think, at a loss. Generally, I thought he was very avuncular and friendly. The knucklehead thing, that's part of his image. That's why he's popular.
Yes, still doesn't explain why he said he was somewhere where he wasn't, why he keeps doing that.
Terrible explanation.
Yeah, indeed. JD Vance, meanwhile, he was standing by his own recent falsehoods over claims that Haitian people who are living and working in Springfield have been eating cats and dogs. And Vance was unhappy when the moderators then fact-checked him on a point of that when they sort of said, look, they're not illegal. You keep saying they're illegal. They're not illegal. Here's what he had to say.
You've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes.
Just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
Pulling the plug. It was effective, I guess. It brought it to an end.
It did. It did. It was a strange thing to be the only thing that they fact-checked, I have to say. Having said that, especially given he was saying something then that was much dodgier, which he said many times during the debate, which is 25 million illegal immigrants.
Yep.
There are not 25 million illegal immigrants. There are 12 million at best. They are. He kept on saying 25 million. If you're going to fact-check something, fact-check that. Yep. But also, you notice in there, he smuggled in a point which he made maybe 5 or 6 times during the debate. It was the point of policy he was most keen to get into that debate, which is the reason prices are high is because of illegal immigrants. In this case, he was talking about the housing. They're saying because there's more illegal immigrants trying to compete for the same number of houses, because there's 25 million illegal immigrants apparently. Now there's no evidence at all that illegal immigration's got anything to do with inflation. In fact, you could argue that having 12 million extra workers is driving down wages. In fact, JD Vance argues that himself. So there's a contradiction there between saying, oh, they're driving down wages, but they also create inflation. It doesn't work like that.
Well, that's a great thing about scapegoats, though. You can blame them for absolutely everything, whether they're involved or not. But overall, look, this was a surprisingly affable exchange between Vance and Walz. Affable and probably forgettable. Although this moment about Trump's refusal to accept his defeat in 2020 could stick in a few minds come November.
Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future.
That is a damning non-answer.
Yeah, certainly was a damning non-answer. Just saying, no, I want to talk about the future, not the past.
Yeah, look, we played that, we kept that short for time, but that exchange went on for about 3 minutes maybe. And I think that was definitely the time when Tim Walz took the most paint off JD Vance. He definitely, I think that point where he said that's a damning non-answer, I think people will remember that. Just on what I would say, just you mentioned the affable thing. One more thing I want to note about that. I thought it was a really effective moment when they were talking about school shootings, and it was guns in general, and there was a lot of actual common ground there. And Tim Walz mentioned that his son witnessed a shooting. And then JD Vance stopped at the beginning of his answer to express sympathy to Walz's son. So I didn't know that. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And I just thought it humanised Vance a lot.
Yes.
And given he's got such a negative reputation, I think this debate will have helped his favourables. I'll be interested to see. I wouldn't be surprised if his favourables went up as a result.
Yeah, whether you agree with him on the substance of his policy positions or not, you did not see a, quote, weird person on this stage. It seemed to be a person who understood the issues and you're right, showed a human side in that moment.
But like you say as well, that 2020 example there, Walz, when he was disagreeing with Vance, it was like disagreeing with him in sorrow, going, we're getting along so well, why'd you have to say that? I thought that was effective as well. I thought they were both very effective. But we've talked a bit about what Walz is trying to do. What Vance was trying to do, I also found quite interesting as well, which is, obviously he's trying to clean up all Trump's many loose threads. I thought he cleaned up a lot of them. But he dealt with those troublesome experts who keep on saying that Trump's policies don't make any sense. I thought
this was great debating. This was great debating technique, if not logical.
Exactly, classic debating technique. Going, all those points are incorrect because of this reason.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Forget the experts.
Common sense.
And similarly, once again, debating technique, taking all the arguments and saying no, they're all invalid, taking Project 2025, taking every scare campaign that's been thrown against Trump, sticking them all together and going, no, none of them are right, because of this.
Something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low, take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
That Democrat program that he was referring to saving was Obamacare. That wasn't the healthcare part of the debate. There's one more thing which I just have to mention, which I think the number one thing that Vance was trying to do is trying to make Kamala Harris president. Over and over again.
For the last 4 years, not the next 4 years.
Yeah, that's right. Over and over again, he was talking about, he's saying, why isn't Kamala Harris she's in power now? Why doesn't she do something about this? She's talking about day one afterwards. No, she's in day 1400. She's been in power for ages. When she first came in, she signed all these executive orders. No, she didn't. She's the vice president. Yeah. But he made her seem like she was the president, which is important because it's a change election. They need to stick her with this administration. Yeah. So I think that was his mission, and I think he largely accomplished it as much as he could. And I think Walz also did very well, probably not quite as well as Vance, but I thought generally they both did pretty well.
Yeah, all in all, it was pretty strong. But obviously there's a logical retort to that, which says, well, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. Your guy was president for 4 years before that, and that's really what this election is about. How bad were the Trump years? How bad would another 4 Trump years be, or another 4 Harris years? We're joined now, though, by Republican strategist Lanhee Chen. He was chief advisor for Mitt Romney during his 2012 presidential campaign against President Barack Obama. Lanhee, welcome back to Planet America.
Thanks, John.
This is certainly a contrast in styles between the two VP candidates. How do you think the two campaigns are going to be feeling after it's all said and done?
Well, I think they'll both have something to take from tonight. I mean, obviously a very strong performance for J.D. Vance. This is an environment in which we knew he was going to do very well. He knows how to deliver lines. He understands how to integrate policy into his arguments. And so I think a lot of people felt he had a very strong evening. And then for Tim Walz, there will be moments that can be pointed to tonight where I thought he really gained his footing, particularly after the first maybe 10 or 15 minutes of the debate. I think he really settled in, and I think the Harris campaign is going to be able to use elements of that, particularly the attacks on Donald Trump, which were the majority, frankly, of Tim Walz's lines. I think that's something that will carry forward as well. So the big question, obviously, is how much a debate like this matters when it's not clear. We'll know in a few days how many Americans actually watched, but vice presidential debates historically just really haven't been all that impactful.
Lanhee, were there any moments in particular that stood out to you as potentially the stuff of either viral clips or attack ads?
Well, I think Tim Walz calling himself a knucklehead, I think that's something that will probably go viral and, in a good way for some, probably in a bad way for others. I thought, J.D. Vance had a couple of good lines about Kamala Harris, where basically he said she's been vice president for X number of days and nothing's happened. I think that was the refrain he kept coming back to. And frankly, that was his task tonight. His task tonight was to paint Kamala Harris as the incumbent. During a cycle and a time when Americans overwhelmingly want change, he was trying to paint her as more of the same, and I think he successfully got there. So anything that sort of contributes to that, I think, will be a strong point for the Trump campaign to amplify.
Lanhee, what did you make of the way that Tim Walz seemed to be pulling his punches, or maybe just didn't have the heart to go too hard? He mentioned venture capitalists in passing a couple of times without saying, JD, you used to work on Wall Street, you're not really an Appalachian good old boy. It was a very light touch. Was that a deliberate strategy, do you think, or is that just Tim Walz?
No, I think a lot of it is that's who he is, and I think you saw tonight a very civil debate. For me, it was very refreshing to see that. I think for too long we've seen these sort of aberrant attacks in American politics that are deeply personal and oftentimes, I think, fundamentally pretty offensive. And tonight you saw a pretty civil discussion between two civil men, and I think Americans needed that, frankly. But in terms of Walz's strategy, I do think it was a lighter touch. I think, frankly, it was probably a lighter touch from Vance as well. He didn't go after Walz, for example, on the stolen valor, the so-called stolen valor issue, questioning his military service. You'll notice Vance didn't pile on when Walz gave what I thought was a pretty clumsy answer about whether he was in fact in Tiananmen Square during the June 1989 uprising and massacre. And so I think that for both candidates, really, tonight was a little bit of a lighter touch than we might expect.
Lanhee, you mentioned before that we're not going to know the ratings for a couple of days yet, but let's just say 100 million people watched it. It was a huge success. Everyone watched it. Even then, does that debate actually matter?
It has the potential to matter. I think more so for the Trump-Vance ticket in this sense, which is previously we haven't heard Donald Trump really articulate in the way that J.D. Vance did tonight. What are you going to do as president? What does the Trump-Vance agenda look like? And I thought that Vance really did put forward some good points on the economy, on immigration, on housing, on the family child tax credit, which is a significant issue of debate here in the U.S. So I think it could work to their benefit in that it normalizes a little bit what, frankly, has been a pretty abnormal campaign so far, even by Donald Trump standards. I mean, talking about the dogs and cats being eaten and all these other things that we've seen during the course of the campaign. I think it normalizes that campaign to a certain degree. So it has the potential, I think, to help Trump-Vance a little bit more than Harris-Walz if we're looking at the broader scope of the campaign.
Finally, Lanhee, you've been in the middle of a presidential campaign heading into this final 5-week stretch. How is this campaign feeling to you? Is it still winnable for both sides? And if so, what is going to be the deciding issue or factor?
It feels remarkably close to me, and I think it is going to come down to energy. And what I mean by that is the enthusiasm of people to turn out to vote. It is one of the hardest things in politics, even presidential politics, is getting people to vote and getting people to turn out. And I think the energy is really what matters in this case. That's going to make the difference for one candidate or another.
Lanhee Chen, always really appreciate your insights. Thank you for taking the time once again.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Former President Trump held a rally in Erie in the swing state of Pennsylvania on the weekend, and in the rambling 1 hour and 50-minute speech, he repeatedly advocated police violence against shoplifters.
The people walk in, they just take everything they want, they walk out of the store. What the hell is going on? See, we have to let the police do their job. And if they have to be extraordinarily rough.
And not just extraordinarily rough.
You know, if you had one day, like one real rough, nasty day with the drugstores as an example, where when they start walking out with, she created something in San Francisco, $950 you're allowed to steal.
And in case you were wondering, that is false. While California's Prop 47 referendum did reclassify felony theft offences below $950 as a misdemeanor, it did not allow shoplifting and petty theft to go unprosecuted. So even though it's a myth that people are robbing stores with impunity, Trump thinks a little bit more police brutality would put a stop to it.
One rough hour, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately. End immediately. It'll end immediately.
A couple of other points on that. Trump overstates Harris's role on Prop 47. She was not involved in drafting the law or passing the law, and she remained neutral on it as California's then Attorney General. And that $950 threshold for thefts to become felonies is actually at the lower end nationally. Importantly, research shows as well the amount of a state's felony theft threshold is not correlated at all with its property crime and larceny rates. But of course, those are just facts. Meanwhile, Trump quickly veered into a personal attack on his presidential rival.
Crooked Joe Biden became mentally impaired, sad. But Lion Kamala Harris, honestly, I believe she was born that way. There's something wrong with Kamala. And I just don't know what it is, but there is definitely something missing. And you know what? Everybody knows it.
And he went on to talk about her being mentally disabled and a bunch of other offensive stuff.
Yeah, look, that's not great. It's probably not a surprise that Trump found himself in Erie County, Pennsylvania. It's considered to be the critical county in the critical state in this election. Erie County has voted for the winner in the last 4 presidential elections, and in the last 25 statewide elections in Pennsylvania, we're talking president, senator, governor, attorney general, treasurer, even auditor. Going back to 2008, Erie County has voted for the winner 23 out of 25 times. So that's not a surprise. What is a surprise is how unhinged Trump's rhetoric is starting to become. I mean, that mentally disabled thing was one example, but in particular recently about migrants, he's been going crazy.
They're actually going in with massive machine gun type equipment. They're going in with guns that are beyond even military scope, and they're taking over apartment buildings. They make our criminals look like babies. These are stone cold killers. They'll walk into your kitchen, they'll cut your throat.
Pace yourself, Trump. There's a month to go. But more on that in a second.
It's hard to know how much further he could go. He literally accused Harris of committing murder earlier today. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris was rallying in Las Vegas, in another battleground state, Nevada, on the weekend. It was a mostly upbeat, just 23-minute speech. Harris is still claiming underdog status.
We are the underdog, and we have some hard work ahead. But here's the thing. We like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work is good work. And with your help, we will win in November. Yes, we will.
This week, though, the polls do remain very tight. Nationally, Harris just under 3 points in front in the average of polls. That lead has remained quite consistent, really, since mid-August now. Last week, Harris also travelled to Douglas, Arizona, near America's southern border with Mexico, for the first time since becoming the Democratic presidential nominee. And there, she delivered a speech on immigration and border security.
And as president, I won't only bring back the border security bill that Donald Trump tanked. I will do more to secure our border. To reduce illegal border crossings, I will take further action to keep the border closed between ports of entry.
And in fact, she says that anybody who seeks asylum after crossing the border anywhere but at a legal point of entry, that claim will be denied. That's a continuation of an executive order signed by President Biden in June. And she's also vowing to work with Republicans to get a bipartisan immigration bill passed. Good luck with that. But the New York Times described Harris's speech as one of her party's toughest on immigration in a generation. And here's why she's getting tough on immigration. Harris trails Trump by 1 point in the average of Arizona polls. It is the only swing state on the border. It is a state that Biden won 4 years ago by fewer than 11,000 votes.
Yeah, she's certainly been trying to talk tough on the border.
Kamala Harris has never backed down from a challenge. She put cartel members and drug traffickers behind bars. And she will secure our border. Here's her plan. Hire thousands more border agents, enforce the law and step up technology, and stop fentanyl smuggling and human trafficking. We need a leader with a real plan to fix the border, and that's Kamala Harris.
She's been walking, pointing, and having pretend conversations around tough-looking border walls like that one there. She didn't just say she'd keep Biden's executive action, she proposed toughening the executive action, which, if you recall, was to close the asylum system unless illegal border crossings stayed below 1,500 per day for a week. Harris says she's going to lower that threshold and she'll extend the period it must be met. But as is often the case in this election, the details not forthcoming. Now, you might think Conservatives would say, too little, too late. But on the day that Harris was at the border, they were actually saying this.
Well, a disturbing development on the border crisis. Wait until you hear this. The Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirms that more than 13,000 illegal immigrants convicted of murder have been caught at the border and then released into the United States. The letter here tells the tale. Hello, I'm John Roberts in Washington. You believe this, Sandra?
Which means they are here.
On ICE's non-detained docket
they're currently tracking 425,000 non-citizens who have been convicted of a crime.
It's fair to say that Team Trump are running hard on this news.
Think about being an ICE officer and having to release 425,000 convicted criminals, 13,000 murderers, 15,000 rapists, and those are only the ones that we know about. The suffering, the misery, the bloodshed that she has unleashed through her policies.
Okay, this needs some serious fact-checking. Firstly, they didn't just let in a bunch of criminals and murderers. The overwhelming majority of them were convicted in America after they arrived. Secondly, they didn't all come illegally. Some came on legal visas and then committed crimes. Thirdly, being on the non-detained docket doesn't mean they're just wandering around. It means they're not detained by immigration authorities. But many of them are currently incarcerated by federal, state or local police for committing those said crimes. Furthermore, most of this happened long before Biden was president. There are people on this list who have been in the country for 40 years. Okay, but for the people who have served their sentences, who are still criminal illegal immigrants, why haven't they been deported? Well, many of the crimes are quite minor. 250,000 of them are traffic offences, assault, drug offences or immigration offences. But more importantly than that, most of those convicted criminals can't be removed because they're from a country that restricts US deportations and those countries won't take them back. Okay, why aren't illegal immigrant murderers and rapists then kept in detention at the very least? Well, once they've served their sentence, you can't just jail people indefinitely. The Supreme Court has held that you can only keep these people in detention for 6 months unless they can show that this person should be kept in detention. And at the end of the day, ICE only has 41,000 beds anyway, so they can only keep so many people in detention at once. Most importantly, this is not Biden's doing, or Harris's doing, as they're saying. This has been happening for a long time, under Trump as well. In fact, just before the Trump administration, there were 368,000 criminals on that list. And then just after the Trump administration, there were 40,000 more criminals on that list. And now, 3 years later, there are 20,000 more criminals on that list. So more criminals were released under Trump than under Biden. Do you think I misspoke then? No, these are the illegal aliens who are either charged, they're in blue, or convicted, they're in green, year by year. More were released under Trump than under Biden. Trump owns this just as much as Biden does, if not more. The problem for Harris is all this just took me 3 minutes to explain, whereas it took 10 seconds for Trump to say,
over 13,099 convicted murderers have crossed the border and are free to roam and kill in our country.
It's always the problem with fact-checking, John. Now, talking about Kamala Harris trying to sell herself as tough on crime, though, the police are usually big fans of Donald Trump, especially now they've got a day of violence that he was talking about. But the Harris campaign has been keen to tout this stunning endorsement from a group of police officials. The Police Leaders for Community Safety apparently is all in for Harris. Now, that's quite a coup for her, you'd have to agree.
Sounds good.
Yeah. If you ignore the fact that the group was only formed in June this year and consists of about 50 law enforcement people, whereas Trump was endorsed by the National Fraternal Order of Police, who have more than 377,000 members. Nice try, Harris.
Now to another story that could have a major impact on this year's presidential election. More than 160 people across 6 states are confirmed dead in the wake of Hurricane Helene, a Category 4 storm which has inflicted massive damage in the past few days. Many of the victims from Florida on the Gulf Coast to as far north as the state of Virginia were swept away by floodwaters. The battleground states of Georgia and particularly North Carolina, the hardest hits, making the politicisation of this tragic storm event inevitable, I suppose. Former President Trump claims the federal government has failed to respond and that Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp has been unable to even speak to President Biden.
The federal government is not being responsive with the having a very hard time getting the president on the phone. He won't get on, and of course the vice president, she's out someplace campaigning, looking for money.
But President Biden says all of that is simply not true.
Let me get this straight. He's lying. And the governor told him he was lying. The governor told him he was lying. I've spoken to the governor, spending time with him, and he told me he's lying. I don't know why he does this. And the reason I get so angry about it, I don't care about what he says about me, but I care what he communicates to the people that are in need.
Governor Kemp has confirmed he has spoken to President Biden and he has praised his offers of federal assistance.
The president just called me yesterday afternoon. I missed him and called him right back. And he just said, hey, what do you need? And I told him, you know, we got what we need. We'll work through the federal process. He offered that if there's other things we need, just to call him directly, which I appreciate that.
Other governors, Republican and Democratic, are saying much the same thing. For Vice President Harris, though, this is an opportunity for voters to see her as a potential commander-in-chief in a crisis. Although, like Trump, she has no actual authority or duties to perform right now, it is still something of a test for her. She has spoken to both Governor Kemp and North Carolina's Democratic Governor, Roy Cooper, and is now making plans to visit the region this week.
We will do everything in our power to help communities respond and recover. And I've shared with them that I plan to be on the ground as soon as possible, but as soon as possible without disrupting any emergency response operations, because that must be the highest priority in the first order of business.
The context of this is important. Ever since the federal government under President George W. Bush failed to adequately respond to the devastation wrought on New Orleans by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, there has been intense political focus on federal responses to storms like this. And so we also get criticisms of President Biden like this one from conservative radio pundits, upset that he spent part of the weekend in Delaware rather than returning straight away to the White House.
He didn't get off his ass until late in this crisis. Then he finally was told it was an election year. So he did what any president would do. But I don't believe he even has the wherewithal to want to travel or go down there.
Biden was asked about those sorts of criticisms as he left a press briefing yesterday, and he explained, well, we do have phones at the beach house.
Hey, Mr. President, why weren't you and Vice President Harris here in Washington commanding this weekend?
I was commanding. I was on the phone for at least 2 hours yesterday and the day before as well. I commanded. It's called a telephone. And all my security people.
Is it not important for the country to see?
And we'll soon see what voters think of the Biden-Harris administration's handling of this crisis. Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp obviously has butted heads a few times with Donald Trump over the years, including pushing back on Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election in the state. I'd say Joe Biden will do very well to be calling Brian every hour or two. Just say, anything you need, Brian? Anything at all? That's fine. That's it for another trip to Planet America, though. We'll see you at the same time next week or anytime you like on Facebook, iView and YouTube.
And join us for a fireside chat on ABC News on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. See you then.
Bye-bye.